After a 40-year career in finance, my guest today moved to Sarasota to retire. And as we well know, retirement is a relative term. He sat on the board of several nonprofits, including his current position on the board of directors of the John and Mable Ringling Museum of Art Foundation. He's a former United States Air Force captain and a graduate of the Wharton School MBA program at the University of Pennsylvania. And for nearly 4 decades, he's pursued one of his passions as an artist and furniture maker. Ed Swan Jr., welcome to Suncoast People.
Thank you, Bob.
I'm grateful to have you here. And I have to say, your experience and your interests are about as diverse as I've ever seen in anyone. Where does all this come from?
I thought I wanted to be an architect, frankly,
Okay.
when I was in high school. But except for designing buildings, I didn't know much about architecture. So there was a strain of enjoying art. But when I got to college, I went to Tufts University, and I, by the way, had gone to a trade school with a small college prep program. So I was ill-prepared for Tufts, so I had to work really hard. But I really, as I was exposed to a broader world, began to see there were a lot of things that I could do, and I couldn't sort things out. So I became a political science major. But that affinity toward art was kind of always there. And about 50 years ago, I was in Washington. I woke up in the middle of the night and started sketching furniture.
In the middle of the night?
In the middle of the night. Woke up.
Where did that come from?
It was, no pun intended, out of the blue. I don't know. But I started sketching some furniture. And then I started actually making pieces. I started with doing large papier-mâché flowers that were lamps.
Okay.
And my wife didn't like the lamp, and eventually it got thrown away, but I loved it. I wasn't a happy camper. But then I did infinity illusions, and then I did wood veneers.
Okay.
And then when I finally got the space, when we moved to Boston many years later, I started making hardwood furniture, solid wood furniture, and I've been doing that for 30 plus years.
And you pursued a career in investment. Tell me a little bit about what that involved.
I worked for a number of institutional investors.
Okay.
These are firms that manage money for large pension funds, large corporate pension funds, basically. And I helped start 2 firms, or got in fairly early in the growth of these firms, and helped build those, as well as for several large investment firms.
Mm-hmm. You seem to keep the balance. That's going to be one of the themes of our conversation, of your right brain, left brain, the creative, the analytical. But you have described sort of a third aspect, and I'm looking at my notes here because I want to get the phrase right, and you describe it as your psychic balance and your desire to help people. How does that sort of third aspect fit into your thinking and your life?
I believe that we should leave the world a better place than we found it. People certainly helped me along the way in my life, and I in turn want to help other young people who may not have been exposed to the kinds of things I've been exposed to along the way. And you're right, the exposure has been pretty diverse, from the military, through business, through charitable kinds of or eleemosynary kinds of activities. And a lot of young people haven't had that exposure. I certainly didn't when I was in high school, although my parents both had masters. We still didn't have that full exposure because of the high school I went to. And so if I can, through my experience, help young people have a vision for their future, and bottom line, you probably can't do it if you can't visualize it. And so part of what I like to do is help young people have a vision, create a vision, their own vision of what they can do beyond bouncing a basketball or, the more mundane things that sometimes young people are focused on.
And you served in the United States Air Force.
Right.
Was this before or after college?
It was after college. I was in ROTC.
Okay.
I was an officer.
Uh-huh.
I must admit, there are people who really served. I kind of was there. I was pretty good at it. But my service was in Las Vegas. And there were people that pulled hard duty.
Oh, yeah.
I did not pull hard duty. But I did spend 4 years as an Air Force officer.
Wow.
There is a very large Air Force base outside of Las Vegas, by the way. I wasn't randomly in Las Vegas.
Yeah. You didn't serve at Area 51, did you?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
When I think Vegas and Air Force, I immediately,
No.
You didn't meet any little green men along the way that you can talk about.
That I can talk about. There is, as you know, Nevada
Yeah.
is a large percent of Nevada is government-owned land.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of things that go on out in Nevada that people can't talk about.
Yeah.
But that's the reality. I mean, it's a big open area.
Sure.
And
We'll leave that at that.
we're not going anywhere with that.
You also spent some years working in New York, and you managed to crack some ceilings and break some barriers along the way. I read an article where you talked about some pretty blatant racism that occurred in the workplace. How did you confront that?
Well, a lot of during the era that I went to Wall Street,
And that was approximately what years?
in the
from
early 70s.
early 70s, okay.
There were relatively few people of color, particularly people in truly professional capacities where they were managing money or they were interfacing with the largest of clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were a bit of an oddity. Over time, I'm pleased to say that Wall Street has become much more diverse. But you sometimes, with care, help people understand they've stepped over a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you do it without care. So you have to establish boundaries. And sometimes some things just aren't worth hassling about, and you just move on with your day. And at the end of the day, Wall Street is about making money.
Yeah. It's not known as a place of inclusion historically.
Historically, it hasn't been, but it now is more inclusive than it was 30 years ago, that's for sure, and that's a good thing. And what that does is that widens the sweep to attract brain power and competency
Sure.
to the firms. And that's what inclusion really is about.
Yeah.
How do you get the best and brightest people in place to help move the enterprise forward?
And we're going to talk more about that in the second half of our conversation. Why Sarasota? Why did you and your wife move to Sarasota?
It was really quite logical in many respects. I had come here for a conference many years ago. And then my wife and I were both tennis players. I'm still very much a tennis player. Not terribly good, but enthusiastic. And So we'd come down, as I said, to play tennis. Then I came down for some conferences and really liked kind of the culture of the city, kind of the general vibe of the city. And it had good weather, a good hospital system. And so I lined up all of the things that were important to me. Mm-hmm. Good transportation in and out, health care, an attractive place, and a place that was rich in culture. And Sarasota ticked the boxes.
I was just thinking that exact same phrase. And that's pretty much how I chose Sarasota as well, or Sarasota chose me. I'm not sure on which of those. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to explore more about diversity, inclusion, and we're going to talk about something that some people have a hard time wrapping their heads around, and that is the difference between equity and equality. More with Ed Swan Jr. right after this. This program is made possible through your support. Please subscribe, follow, and like on these platforms. You can also support us by going to patreon.com/SuncoastPeople. Thank you. Ed Swan Jr. is something of a Renaissance man, an artist, a financial expert, a former Air Force captain, and a champion for racial justice. Now, you grew up in Detroit.
Correct.
How did growing up as a kid in Detroit, how did that shape who you are today?
The two most important influences in my life were my mother and father. My father, among other things, was the executive director of the NAACP in Detroit. My mother had her master's in social work, and she grew up in Cleveland. And very early on, and during high school, she was involved in an effort to desegregate restaurants in Cleveland as high school.
And what years approximately was this?
That would have been in the late 1920s, probably.
Okay.
And so I was always in an environment of folks that were highly educated. Both my parents had masters. An environment where the search for excellence was very important, and the search for equality was very important. I mean, that was the world I lived in. And so that was my foundation. And that was my expectation in life. I was going to go to college. There was an environment where I was going to do well. My father's friends helped open doors for me. And so it was just the life path, and one that I wanted.
Mm-hmm. So your parents set a pretty high bar for you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you have siblings?
Yes. I have a younger brother, of whom I am very proud. He is a tenured university professor at University of Massachusetts. He has taught there for many years. He followed me at Tufts University, from where I graduated in 1963. He has been very politically active. He's a wonderful human being. He's one of the few people that I know that is a double Fulbright.
Oh,
and
wow.
He's taught at 2 different universities on the continent of Africa.
Boy, do I feel stupid right now.
And in fact, he
Wow.
would teach in French. He was in Benin and in Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, and in Senegal.
Your parents must have been incredibly proud of you and your brother. Did they live long enough to see the successes that you achieved?
I assumed that they were. And I mean, it was just this, we did what we were supposed to do.
So this is just expected. It wasn't like, wow, look at my kid.
No. It was like, it was expected. Wow. But where I have a great deal of admiration is for my father and his brother. My paternal grandfather emigrated from Bermuda and became a judge in Detroit. And I don't know what kind, it may have been an administrative law judge, I don't know, some kind of judge. Became accepted to the bar. I think he was the first black law graduate from University of Michigan. I'm not sure, we can't verify that. He brought his young bride from Bermuda. He then died of cancer. And
did you know him?
No. He died probably in 1920, something like that, in the 1920s. His bride,
your grandmother,
my grandmother, raised these two young men, except that she died of cancer when they were in high school. So these two young men put each other through college by working alternate kind of periods of time.
Are you close to your brother?
Absolutely. It was my mother passed about 20 years ago. It was her fondest wish that my brother and I would be as close as my father, and obviously his father, and brother were. And in fact, we are. So we're very close.
I'm going to shift gears just slightly here. There's been a lot of buzz about equality and equity as it applies to everything from employment to the judicial system to financial situations and so on and so on. Let's take a couple minutes and kind of understand what is equality. Let's start with that word. To you, what does equality mean?
If I can take the liberty to rephrase your question.
Please.
If, in a very simple way, I mean, these discussions are very hard.
Yeah.
They're very hard because those that have, without putting any racial or religious or age parameters around, have and have not. Set that aside. Those that have, think of the world as, well, here we are now. Let's work it out going forward. It's the difference between an income statement and a balance sheet. Now, for many of your viewers really don't know that much about accounting. But what an income statement shows is the firm's revenues and expenses over a period of time, over generally a quarter or a year. There's a start and an end. The balance sheet basically shows the assets and liabilities of a firm at a specific point in time.
A snapshot.
A snapshot.
Okay.
As opposed to a motion picture.
Yeah.
The discussions in our society become so fraught because those that have prospered say, well, maybe something bad happened. Forget about to whom and how, under what circumstances. Maybe something bad happened. But let's start here and work it out. Those that feel they have been diddled along the way are saying, well, wait a minute. Something happened back here that created a chain of events that affect where we are now. You can't just start where we are now and say, work it out. You've got to look at the chain of events. And
That's a tough conversation, though. I mean, is it?
That's right.
How do you do that? How do you? I mean, we've heard about reparations, and we've heard about, you know, people who, to put it in sort of basic, crass terms, want money. How do you do that?
That's what the society's come in grips with now. How do you reconcile
Yeah.
past injustices with the way society is shaped now? And that's the core of our difficulty. Set aside specific issues. I mean, there are lots of issues. There's the issue of slavery, and we didn't have slaves, by the way. We had people brought from Africa who were enslaved.
Right.
Okay, that's different.
Yes.
You know, ships didn't show up on the shores of Africa looking for slaves. They captured people and enslaved them.
Yes.
But there's the whole westward movement
Yeah.
in this country, and essentially land taken. I mean, the West wasn't empty. I mean, when the Pilgrims showed up,
Right.
there were people here.
Yes.
There were societies, thriving societies.
Yeah.
So part of this is the inevitable ebb and flow of conquest. Part of this is just some really nasty, ugly stuff. But the discussion is fraught with perceptions of time.
Okay.
Who did what, when, with what implications, and what's that mean to me now? So that, anyway.
Do you feel like we're having those discussions these days?
Sure, we are. I think that on the far left, there's a hardened position, and on the far right, there's a hardened position, and folks may not be listening to each other. But yes, the discussion is happening, and there's an ebb and flow of attitude.
Sure. I want to get back to the word equity. And how do you define equity?
Equity, in its most profound sense, is assuring, particularly for young people, that they have the tools to live out their lives to the fullness of their capacity. And what does that mean? That's both skills. If you go to a school that has books that have been used and marked up, that's not the same as going to a school that gets brand new books. If you go to a school where there may not be a broad vision of what your future can be if you do X, Y, and Z, that's very different than if you go to a school that is rife with examples of what your future can be. And so it's not just an issue of race. What our society has to come to grips with are two things. One, how do we help everyone live to their fullest potential? And two, how do we condition folks who see others as outsiders with perhaps a sense of fear, physical fear,
Right.
fear of physical harm because of stereotypes, fear of displacement because you have a rising population of folks not like them. It could be ethnically, it could be religiously, but all of a sudden, I'm not going to be as important because somebody is going to surge ahead of me.
Yeah.
And that's a big driver in our society. I mean, there is a great race not to be at the bottom of the social and economic ladder. And so we create boogeymen
Sure.
to make sure we're not at the bottom.
Yeah. Getting back to school, and you were talking about, having good books and having a good environment in school to nurture and to encourage the growth that we've talked about. What about at home? You were very fortunate to have two parents who were enormous cheerleaders
Absolutely.
and set expectations, and not, I look at it and go, extraordinary expectations, but a few was just day to day. How do we encourage a environment in the home, without stepping on individuals' rights and how to raise one's kids, but how do we carry that positivity, that encouragement from school to home?
Part of it really starts in the school.
It does. It absolutely does.
I can remember, the people who were my counselors were nice people and whatnot. They only knew 2 or 3 universities. And they were all good schools. I'm exaggerating a bit, but they were regional schools. University of Michigan, Michigan State. Remember, I was in school in Detroit.
Eastern Michigan?
Eastern Michigan, which is where my father went, my mother went. But the horizons, the college catalogs that were in the room wherever you got the college catalogs in my high school were very limited.
Yeah.
And so we need to have an expansiveness. And part of that, Booker High School has been wonderful here in having people come in and talk with students. And so I've talked with the students, and other people have talked with the students.
Were you well received?
Oh, absolutely. 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 You can't do it unless you can visualize it. And so, part of the answer to your question, maybe I'm not really answering, I'm dancing around it, is how do we help young people have a vision of what can be, number one, and number two, how then do we help them understand what the steps are from where they are now to actually actualizing the vision. If somebody says, I want to be a pilot, but omits the fact that they need pilot training, that's not going to work.
Right. Do you think there could be more help for parents?
I think parents, are you saying help for or help from?
Well, help for parents in order to get help from parents.
I think that there can be. You probably run into sheer questions of economics.
Sure.
In the sense that if I'm working 2 jobs to support my family, How much time can I devote to this process, number one. Number two, if perhaps for whatever reason I don't feel that, let's say, that I speak English well. I could be someone who's immigrated from another country, or I just don't feel my grammar is good. I'm going to be reticent to interact with the educational system in a way that someone who has a PhD, I'm taking it to an extreme, would. So yes, but I think there have to be mechanisms to help parents help their students.
Yeah. Is there anything that you just look at, whether you're reading an article in the paper or sitting in a meeting and hearing people talk about these kinds of things that we've been talking about, and you just shake your head and go, they just don't get it? Do you ever reach that point where it's of perhaps frustration of they just don't get it?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And how do you process
Absolutely.
that for yourself? How do you process that?
It probably falls in simplest sense, two buckets. One bucket says, what can I do to help? Another bucket says, this just ain't worth my time. I'm not going to deal with it.
What would you like your legacy to be?
Wasn't the friendliest, but he was a pretty decent guy. Have a couple young people where I've opened the door and held it open, just as people have opened the door for me in various settings and held it open. I say a couple of young people, it'd be wonderful if a bunch of young people said, hey, at some point, here was a person that said something or did something or helped create an opportunity that made my life, meaning that person's life, better, and that I feel sufficient commitment to do that for other folks. That would be a life well lived on its highest order. And I'd really like for somebody to see my furniture and say, wow, hey, that's pretty neat stuff on the artistic side.
Any regrets?
Sure. There are decisions that I've made that if I could go back, I might have made another decision. But we never know that when you, as Yogi Berra said, when you get to a fork in the road, take it. Well, that other decision may have looked like it would have been wonderful. You just don't know. And the example that I like to use, I use in my head all the time, is that I could have gone to work for a firm that was in the World Trade Center. Great economic opportunity, but for the fact that a plane hit it. I could have been there.
Yeah.
And so maybe some of the choices, maybe all the choices, were the best possible choices in the face, especially if I knew what I couldn't know, the unknown of the future. I don't know. But sure, there are things that I do differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're all smarter looking back than we are looking forward.
Of course. Monday morning quarterback, so to speak, right?
And if you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're not.
I can honestly say I have never thought that. I'm not the brightest person in the room, but I make up for it with smoke and mirrors. That's what I like to say.
And hard work.
It has been hard work. And Ed Swan Jr., thank you so much for being here. And I want to thank you for watching and supporting Suncoast People. I want to thank you for the emails, and make sure to subscribe, like, and follow on whatever platform you're watching on. If you want to send us an email, info@suncoastpeople.com. I'm Robert Tim, and thanks for watching.